What is a conviction? What do I have to put down on my job application? What do I have to tell my employer? What do I tell people about a crime if I do have a conviction? These are the kinds of questions I answer pretty regularly for my clients and for their friends and for their family. And I want to talk a little bit about it because it hits one of my pet peeves in the legal system, which is highly academic answers versus the reality. Things that are concrete, things that are how it's going to play out in reality. And personally, I'm a reality kind of guy. I think that law is great. I like talking the theory of it, but its impact on people's lives is what drives me as a criminal defense attorney, as somebody who does trial work, as somebody who negotiates cases and handles a lot of difficult situations. It's all about the impact. And so let's just talk about the theory for a minute. Anytime you have a knowing, involuntary, and intelligent admission to facts that constitute a crime, arguably you've just exposed yourself to somebody perceiving you as being convicted of that crime. An interesting variation of that is if you stipulate to the facts, if you get close to some way admitting that those facts that constitute a crime are yours, agencies, that would be government agencies, can potentially say, well, wait a minute, hold on, that's a crime from our perspective. That's a very academic discussion, but it actually had a very practical application about, I don't know, 8 years ago when the federal immigration was looking at people who were stipulating to police reports and were saying because you stipulated to the facts in a police report to constitute a crime, we are going to consider that a crime for purposes of deportation. Since that time, there's been some changing of the language of that stipulation that has produced, quote unquote, a immigration safe stipulated order of continuance, as if there is really anything that is immigration safe, but it at least fixes that issue of whether or not people stipulate to the facts in the police report, or they disagree that a judge can look at the police report and come to their own conclusion. In terms of impact, in terms of what ends up on your record, in terms of what you have to tell people, really a question becomes whether or not documents that say you're convicted go from the particular courthouse that you are dealing with, be it a city courthouse, municipal courthouse, district courthouse, or a superior courthouse, whether those documents end up going down to the Washington State Patrol and get entered in a database that can be done. A watch report can be pulled on somebody for about $10, and you can see that somebody's convicted of a crime. It also becomes interesting who is going to be doing a background check on you. If you're getting a high security clearance from a federal government, or you're on jobs from Boeing or from Microsoft that require high security clearances from the federal government, they will send out agents that will go look at the specific courthouse and require a full and fair disclosure, very similar to the obligations of lawyers when they are disclosing their information for purposes of their background checks. A full disclosure is necessary. If you get caught omitting something, it's 10 times worse than if you actually admitted to it. So practically, for example, there are a couple of things that are very arguably not convictions for practical purposes. For example, stipulated order of continuances, where there's a contract between the prosecuting agency and my client and I, whereby my client agrees to do certain things and the case is continued while those things are going on, and if those things are done, the case gets dismissed. Technically there is no, or arguably I should say, there is no conviction. And certainly there is no document that goes down to Washington State Patrol that would show up in a background check for purposes of employment. So that is one situation where the practical is different than the academic. Very similarly, deferred prosecutions, where you defer a prosecution on a case because of a drug or alcohol problem, and in return for that, at the end of that period of time, they dismiss the case against you. Practically, that file never leaves the courthouse where you entered a deferred prosecution, and it doesn't go down and get entered as a prosecution or as a conviction for purposes of your record. But if you go look in a deferred prosecution, the actual document itself, it requires that you not say that you believe you're innocent of the crime, and you have to admit that the facts are in it, that the facts relating to the crime are true and that you will run a risk of, or you believe a judge will find you guilty of the crime. And so the academics of that document are different than the practical reality of that document. In terms of what people need to put down on employment background applications, what they need to tell their employer, the answer is a little different for each. If you're talking about what you have to tell your employer, the first thing you need to go to is your employment handbook. What is required to be divulged, what isn't. Again, the benefit of being in a country of laws and where we have all these laws is if you go look at the law and it says you don't have to do it, then technically you don't have any obligation. When it comes to employment applications, it starts getting into that very issue of what can somebody find out about you and what level of how detailed will the analysis be about you. And then you start making a calculated risk decision about what you need to disclose or what you don't need to disclose. I have clients with serious felony convictions who have not disclosed it on a job application. They happen to not do a background check on them, and they are working at 6-digit jobs because of it. So it really is it becomes more of a discussion about the circumstances of your background check, who you're doing this with, where a conviction data or arguable conviction data is at, and these types of things. One last issue I want to hit is, from my perspective, is when somebody talks to you about a criminal conviction, what do you say? What if you didn't disclose and they bring it up, for example? Or what if you did disclose and they bring it up? And as a policy, I always tell my clients the same thing. You want to disclose the minimum amount of possible, and you want to keep it vague and light and move off topic. You want to have a pre-planned 1-sentence or 2-sentence response on a topic that doesn't get into the details of it, and then shift on to as to employment. What's the important things? You know, how hard you work, any reviews that you have on yourself, your knowledge of the particularities of the job, etc. So when you answer, for example, around a domestic violence conviction that you have in your criminal record, it's very easy to say, well, we went through a divorce and it was really difficult, and I ended up getting charged and convicted of a crime relating to my wife. It was a really, or you can say, my wife and I had a disagreement in our divorce and it didn't turn out well. That would be a very simple answer and a very vague answer and a very understandable answer. Getting into the details, we were both drunk, we had a brawl, she screamed and yelled, the kids saw it, the police got called, I got hostile. You don't want to get into the details of what happened. Besides it not being relevant, it's distracting from an employment application. So you have to have a canned response that's simple and to the point as it relates to any criminal charge that you're involved in. Hope this gives people kind of a vague framework to understand what is and what isn't conviction, and understanding that it's the academic discussion about it is different than the application, and the application discussion is really fact-driven. What is your particular situation? What are the particular concerns? What profession are you in? All becomes relevant as to what is a conviction and what will have an impact on your life.